In the sweltering heat of Java, under the shadow of volcanic peaks, the air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax and indigo. In a sprawling batik workshop on the outskirts of Surabaya, in the year 1935, a man lay dying. Pak Suitomo, master dyer whose intricate patterns adorned the sarongs of princes and planters alike, clutched his stomach, his face contorted in agony. Froth bubbled at his lips as he gasped, "The dye! It burns!" His workers gathered in horror, but it was too late. The great artisan was dead, poisoned, they whispered. But by whom? And how in a place where beauty was wrought from wax and colour? Little did they know that a small Belgian gentleman with impeccable moustaches and extraordinary little grey cells was about to arrive. Chapter 1. Arrival in the Spice Islands. The steamship KPM liner cut through the glassy waters of the Java Sea, its engines throbbing like a distant gamelan as it approached the bustling port of Batavia in the spring of 1935. Hercule Poirot stood at the rail, impeccably attired in a light tropical suit of finest linen, a Panama hat tilted precisely upon his head, and his famous moustaches waxed to symmetrical perfection, despite the humid air that threatened to undo the efforts of lesser men. The little Belgian detective had come to the Dutch East Indies seeking respite from the damp chills of England and the endless grey of European winters. An old acquaintance, a Dutch planter of considerable means, had extended an invitation to visit his estate near Surabaya, promising tranquillity amid rice terraces and volcanic shadows. Yet, even as the ship docked amid the cacophony of coolies unloading cargo, the cries of street vendors, and the heavy scent of cloves and copra, Poirot felt the familiar tingle of anticipation. Tranquillity, he reflected with a private smile, was rarely granted to Hercule Poirot for long. "Ah, mon Dieu," he murmured to himself, dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "This heat is formidable, but the Spice Islands, they are vibrant, alive with colour and mystery. One senses it already." A carriage awaited him at the quay, arranged by his host, and soon Poirot was rattling along the broad avenues of Batavia, past the stately white buildings of the Dutch administration, the canals reminiscent of Amsterdam yet fringed with palms, and the markets where Javanese, Chinese and Arabs mingled in a tapestry of commerce. The journey eastward to Surabaya would take several days by train and motor car, but news travelled faster than any conveyance in the colonies. It reached him at a rest house in Semarang, delivered by a flustered Dutch resident magistrate who recognized the famous detective from newspaper illustrations. Pak Suitomo, master Batik Dyer to one of the wealthiest plantations in East Java, had died suddenly and horribly 2 days earlier. The symptoms, violent abdominal cramps, vomiting, convulsions, pointed unmistakably to poisoning. The local doctor had found traces of a heavy metal in the victim's stomach, and whispers of murder rippled through the European clubs and native kampongs alike. The plantation owner, Meneer Hendrik van der Meer, had urgently requested assistance, for the colonial police were stretched thin, and the case threatened scandal. Poirot's green eyes gleamed. "It is fate," he declared to the magistrate. "I'm invited to this very plantation. Naturally, I shall investigate." Thus, when the motor car finally swept through the gates of the Van der Meer estate, on the outskirts of Surabaya, Poirot was already primed for the drama that awaited. The plantation house was a grand edifice in the Indo-European style. Wide verandas shaded by frangipani trees, white columns, and a red-tiled roof glowing under the fierce sun. Beyond it stretched orderly rows of indigo plants and morinda trees. their leaves destined for the dyeing vats, while nearer the house lay the sprawling batik workshops, open-sided buildings where dozens of workers, mostly women in colourful kine and kabaya, bent over frames stretching cotton cloth. Applying wax with canting or copper stamps in intricate patterns. Meneer Hendrik van der Meer greeted him personally on the veranda steps, a stout man in his 50s with a florid face, thinning fair hair, and a linen suit already darkened with perspiration. His handshake was damp and over-hearty. "Monsieur Poirot, thank heaven you have come so promptly. This dreadful business has cast a pall over the entire estate." Puck Sweatermo was not merely an employee. He was an artist, the finest batik master in all Java. His tooless work fetched prices in Amsterdam and Paris that made our fortunes, and now poisoned, they say. Poirot inclined his head graciously. "I am desolated to hear it, monsieur. But tell me, if you please, the circumstances. Every detail is of importance to Hercule Poirot." Van der Meer led him into the cool interior of the house, where punkahs swayed lazily overhead, stirred by invisible servants. Over glasses of chilled gin pahit, the planter recounted the events. 3 evenings prior, Sweatermo had remained late in the main workshop, demonstrating a new parang rusak pattern to a select group of buyers. Afterward, as was his habit, he had taken tea alone in his private corner of the building, a strong, sweet Javanese brew prepared by his longtime assistant, Nyai Larasati. Within minutes, he had begun to clutch his stomach, crying out that the dye was burning him from within. By the time help arrived, he was in convulsions. He died before the doctor from Surabaya could reach the estate. "The doctor says antimony," Van der Meer concluded heavily, "like tartar emetic or rat poison, but there were also traces of arsenic, which confused matters. Arsenic is sometimes present in old-fashioned dyes, you know." The police inspector suspects one of the workers, perhaps a disgruntled apprentice. Native superstitions are rife. Some even whisper of a curse on the batik. Poirot's moustaches twitched. "A curse? No, no, monsieur. Hercule Poirot does not believe in curses. He believes in motive, means, and opportunity. Who stands to gain from this death?" Van der Meer shifted uncomfortably. "No one, surely. Sweatermo was irreplaceable." "Yet someone replaced his life with death," Poirot observed mildly. "Permit me to meet the household and the principal persons involved." Over the next hours, as the fierce afternoon sun softened into golden evening, Poirot was introduced to the key figures. First, Mevrouw Anna van der Meer, a handsome woman in her 40s with cool blue eyes and ash-blonde hair, coiled elegantly beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She greeted Poirot with composed courtesy, but he noted the faint strain about her mouth. Then Raden Maswibovo, a young Javanese aristocrat of diminished fortunes who served as Sweatermo's chief assistant. Tall and graceful in a crisp white suit, he spoke flawless Dutch and regarded Poirot with intelligent dark eyes that betrayed both pride and ambition. Finally, Nyai Larasati herself, Sweatermo's devoted helper and, by native custom, his concubine. She was perhaps 30, with luminous skin and long black hair coiled with jasmine flowers. Her kabaya of fine batik clung to her slender form, and her eyes were red from weeping. When Poirot offered condolences, she bowed deeply, murmuring in soft Malay-inflected Dutch that the Tuan had been everything to her. As twilight fell and the air filled with the plaintive notes of gamelan music drifting from a distant village, Poirot strolled alone toward the workshops. The scent of beeswax, indigo, and damp cloth hung heavy. Workers had departed, leaving bolts of half-finished batik drying on bamboo racks, patterns of phoenixes, Garuda birds, and forbidden royal motifs glowing in the lamplight. Poirot paused at Sweatermo's private corner. A low table still bearing the fateful teacup, now seized as evidence. He examined it minutely with his pocket lens, noting the faint greenish residue at the bottom. Nearby lay scattered canting tools and a sheet of paper with preliminary sketches of the new pattern. Intricate, exquisite, valuable. Then his sharp eyes caught something else. A single wax droplet on the earthen floor, fresher than the others, leading toward the storeroom door. And on the threshold, almost invisible against the dark wood, a faint scuff mark, as though a European shoe had scraped there hastily. Poirot straightened, his expression grave. The little grey cells were already beginning their work. Somewhere in this fragrant, colourful world of wax-resist and hidden patterns, a murderer lurked. And Hercule Poirot, with his impeccable order and symmetry, would uncover the truth, no matter how cleverly the design had been concealed. As he turned back toward the lighted house, a shadowy figure detached itself from behind a drying rack and vanished silently into the night. Poirot did not see it, but he felt the watchful malice in the air. Chapter 2. The Workshop of Secrets. The morning sun rose fierce and golden over the Vandermeer estate, turning the dew on the indigo leaves into 1,000 sparkling jewels. Hercule Poirot, having passed a night of orderly reflection in a guest room cooled by punkahs and the faint scent of frangipani, descended early to the workshops. He was attired, as always, with impeccable neatness. A white linen suit pressed to knife-edge creases, a pale grey tie, and spotless spats despite the dusty paths. In one gloved hand, he carried a slender Malacca cane. In the other, a small leather notebook and silver propelling pencil. The Batik workshops lay a short walk from the main house, a series of long, open-sided buildings roofed with red tiles and atap palm thatch. From them rose the perpetual steam of dyeing vats, mingled with the sharp tang of beeswax, the earthy depth of indigo, and the sweeter notes of morinda root and soga bark. Women workers were already at their stations, seated cross-legged on bamboo platforms, their fingers deftly guiding copper tea-apps or delicate canting spouts as they applied molten wax in patterns of astonishing intricacy. Bolts of cotton cloth stretched on bamboo frames hung everywhere like banners. Some still white and waiting, others glowing with the deep blues, rich browns and brilliant crimsons that had made Javanese batik famous across the world. Poirot paused at the entrance to the principal toolist workshop, the domain of the late Passuetomo, where the finest hand-drawn pieces were created. A Dutch overseer bowed respectfully and withdrew at a gesture from the detective. Poirot wished to observe undisturbed. He moved slowly between the frames, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Here was the low teak table where Suetomo had taken his final cup of tea. The delicate porcelain cup itself had been removed for analysis, but its faint ring still stained the wood. Nearby lay the master's personal tools, a row of canting of varying spout sizes, bowls of cooled wax, and sketches pinned to the wall. Preliminary designs for the new parang rusak motif that had been the pride of his final days. The pattern was bold, yet broken, symbolizing both power and humility, traditionally reserved for royalty. Poirot bent closer, examining the floor with his pocket lens. The wax droplet he had noticed the previous evening was still there, hardened now, and the faint scuff mark on the storeroom threshold remained. He followed the trail with meticulous care. The storeroom door stood ajar. Inside, shelves held jars of pigments, bundles of roots, tins of imported synthetic dyes, and, upon a high shelf, a blue packet labelled Rattenvergif, in Dutch, rat poison containing antimony. Interesting, murmured Poirot. Accessible to any who possess the key, or who know where a spare is hidden. He emerged to find Nyai Larasati approaching, carrying a tray with a fresh pot of tea and small porcelain cups. She moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, her batik kain brushing the ground, jasmine flowers still fresh in her coiled hair. Yet her lovely face was drawn with grief, and her dark eyes avoided the corner where her master had died. "Good morning, Tuan Poirot," she said softly in Dutch tinged with melodic Malay. "I thought you might wish refreshment before the heat grows stronger." Poirot accepted with a courteous bow. "You are most kind, Nyai. It was you who prepared Patsuetomo's tea on the fatal evening." She nodded, setting the tray down with hands that trembled slightly. "Always, Tuan. Every evening after work he liked his tea strong and sweet, with a little cardamom. I brewed it myself, as I had for 10 years. And no one else touched the cup. No one. He preferred to drink alone while he contemplated the day's patterns." A tear escaped and she brushed it away. "He was more than master to me. He taught me the secrets of the canting when I was a girl, orphaned from the kampong. Without him—" Her voice broke. Poirot regarded her compassionately yet keenly. Jealousy was a powerful motive, and rumour already whispered that Suetomo had spoken lately of taking a younger wife from a wealthy Chinese merchant family, a union that would have displaced Larasati from her privileged position. "Tell me, Nyai," he asked gently, "did Pak Suetomo have enemies?" She hesitated. "Enemies? No, but there were tensions, with Mynheer van der Meer over money, with Raden Mas Wibowo over the old patterns." At that moment, as if summoned by his name, Raden Mas Wibowo appeared at the workshop entrance. The young aristocrat was clad in a pristine white suit with a pishi cap, his bearing proud despite his reduced circumstances. He greeted Poirot with formal courtesy. "I came to see if anything of the master's work requires completion," he said. "The buyers from Amsterdam are impatient for the new parang pieces." Poirot studied him. "You were Pak Suetomo's chief apprentice, Raden Mas." "Assistant, rather," Wibowo replied with a faint edge of bitterness. "He guarded the forbidden motifs jealously, the true parang, the kawung, the seaman. Only he could execute them perfectly. Yet he promised that one day the knowledge would pass to me, to preserve pure Javanese tradition against—" he glanced toward the main house— "foreign dilution." "Ambition," Poirot noted silently. "A nobleman forced to work under a Dutch planter and a commoner master. Resentment could fester deeply." From the far end of the workshop came the brisk step of Mevrouw Anna van der Meer. She wore a wide straw hat and carried a parasol against the climbing sun. Her manner was composed, almost cool. "Monsieur Poirot, my husband asks if you have discovered anything yet. The uncertainty is distressing for everyone." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, these matters require patience. But tell me, did you yourself have occasion to speak with Pak Suetomo in recent days?" A faint flush touched her cheeks. "Only in passing. He was a talented man, and I admired his work. Nothing more." Yet Poirot's acute ears had already caught whispers among the servants that the beautiful Mevrouw had been seen lingering near the workshops at unusual hours, and that Suetomo's charm had not been confined to cloth and dye. As the Mevrouw departed, Dr. Jansen arrived, a thin, earnest Dutch physician with spectacles and a medical bag. He confirmed his earlier findings to Poirot privately. "Definite antimony poisoning, monsieur. Acute and massive dose. Death within an hour." But curiously, there were also traces of arsenic. Lesser amount, perhaps incidental from the dyes. Many old recipes use orpiment or real gar. Or, said Poirot thoughtfully, the arsenic is intended to mislead us toward accidental contamination. The doctor shrugged. Possible, but unlikely. Rat poison is straightforward. Poirot thanked him and returned to his examination. In a wastebasket beneath Suetomo's table, he discovered a torn fragment of paper. A letter, apparently, accusing the master dyer of stealing valuable patterns from the Vandermeer archives. The handwriting was European, the tone furious. Forged or genuine grievance? He pocketed the scrap carefully. The heat was now intense. Workers paused to fan themselves and drink from bamboo tubes. Poirot retreated to the shade of a warangun tree, fanning himself delicately with his Panama hat. The little grey cells worked rapidly. Motives were emerging like patterns through successive dye baths. Greed from the owner, jealousy from the concubine, ambition from the noble apprentice, perhaps scandal from the wife. And opportunity. The tea had been prepared by Larasati, but drunk in solitude, or had it? The fresh wax trail suggested someone had lingered afterward. As the gamelan began its evening practice in the nearby kampong, its bronze notes floating on the warm air, Poirot noticed something else. One of the drying racks held a newly completed batik bearing the parang rusak motif, flawless, yet completed after Suetomo's death. Who had dared finish the master's final design? Before he could investigate further, a sharp cry echoed from the direction of the main house. Poirot's head snapped up. Mevrouw Vandermeer stood on the veranda, one hand pressed to her throat, staring toward the garden as though she had seen a ghost. The shadows were lengthening, and with them, the secrets of the batik workshop seemed to deepen rather than reveal themselves. Poirot replaced his hat with decision. The investigation had only begun, and already the pattern of murder was becoming more intricate and more dangerous than even he had anticipated. Chapter 3. Shadows of Motives. The cry that had pierced the evening air brought servants running from every direction. By the time Hercule Poirot reached the veranda, Mevrouw Anavan Demire had sunk into a rattan chair, her face pale beneath the wide brim of her hat, one gloved hand pressed to her heart. Meneer Vandermeer hovered anxiously beside her, offering a glass of water which she waved away. "It was nothing," she said at last, her voice steadier than her trembling fingers. "A trick of the light. I thought I saw a figure in white moving between the frangipani trees, like one of the old Javanese spirits the workers speak of, the strain of these past days, no doubt." Poirot regarded her with polite sympathy, yet his gaze was keen. "The mind, madame, when under tension, can indeed conjure phantoms. But often those phantoms have their roots in something very real. You will permit that I examine the garden?" She inclined her head, and Poirot descended the steps into the gathering dusk. Lanterns were already being lit along the paths, their yellow glow flickering across the broad leaves of banana plants and the pale blossoms that perfumed the night. He moved slowly, his cane tapping softly on the gravel, eyes scanning the soft earth borders. Near the clump of frangipani, he found what he sought. A single clear footprint in the moist soil. Small, narrow, the mark of a European lady's shoe, the heel slightly sunk, as though the wearer had stood motionless for some moments, watching. Watching what? The workshops lay directly in line with the spot. Poirot straightened, his expression thoughtful. Fear, he reflected, was a most revealing emotion, and Mevrouw Vandermeer, for all her composure, was afraid. He returned to the house in time for dinner, a formal affair served on the wide veranda by silent houseboys in white jackets. The long teak table gleamed with silver and crystal. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead. Present were the Vandermeers, Raden Masribovo, who dined occasionally with the family as a mark of his status, and Dr. Jansen, who had been asked to remain. Nyai Larasati, by native custom, took her meals separately. Conversation was subdued at first, circling carefully around the one subject that occupied every mind. At length, Mynheer Vandermeer cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, have your investigations this day yielded anything of significance?" Poirot delicately dissected a piece of ristaffel, the spiced rice surrounded by its dozen small dishes of sambal, serundeng, and satay. "Many things, monsieur. Impressions, observations, the beginnings of a pattern. But patterns, like batik, require many immersions before the design becomes clear." Vandermeer mopped his brow. "The police inspector from Surabaya arrives tomorrow. He is competent enough with native disputes, but a poisoning, it is unprecedented here." "Unprecedented?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Yet poison is the most intimate of weapons. It requires proximity, trust. Someone Pax Suetomo trusted, prepared or delivered that fatal cup." All eyes turned involuntarily toward the dark beyond the veranda, where the workshops lay silent now. Dr. Jansen adjusted his spectacles. "I have sent samples to the laboratory in Batavia. We shall have confirmation of the exact substance within a fortnight, but I am certain of antimony." Raden Masribovo spoke for the first time, his voice low and musical. In the old Kraton tales, poison was sometimes used to settle matters of honor or inheritance. But Pax Suetomo had no enemies that I knew of. He was respected, even feared a little, for his mastery. "Feared?" Poirot pounced gently. "Explain, if you please." Ribovo hesitated, glancing at Vandermeer, only that he guarded the forbidden patterns fiercely. The Parang Rusak, the Kawung, those belong by ancient custom to royalty and nobility. A commoner who wears them risks grave misfortune. Suetomo alone had the right to create them for export. By special dispensation from the Susuhunan, he denied me permission to execute them myself, though I entreated him often. Vandermeer laughed uncomfortably. "Superstition! The buyers in Europe care nothing for such things. They pay handsomely for the exotic." "Yet tradition dies hard," murmured Poirot. "And wounded pride can be a dangerous thing." After dinner, Poirot requested private conversations. He began with Mevrouw Vandermeer in the dimly lit drawing-room, where punkahs stirred the heavy air and the scent of tuberoses filled the space. "Madam," he began directly, "you are a woman of intelligence and sensitivity. You admired Pax Suetomo's work greatly, I think." She met his gaze steadily. "He was a genius with cloth and colour. Yes, I admired him. And perhaps," Poirot continued softly, "the man himself? There are whispers, madame, of a closeness between you. In a small community such as this plantation, gossip travels swiftly." Her cheeks flushed, but her voice remained cool. "Gossip is the pastime of idle tongues. I spoke with Suetomo often about designs. He valued my suggestions on European tastes. There was nothing more. My husband is possessive, perhaps, but he had no cause for jealousy." "Yet jealousy needs little cause to flourish," observed Poirot, "and fear of scandal even less. Tell me, where were you on the evening of the death?" "At a bridge party in the home of the resident's wife in Surabaya. I returned late, after the tragedy had occurred." Poirot nodded. "An alibi, then, easily checked." He next summoned Raden Masribovo to the veranda, where fireflies danced in the dark. The young man smoked a Kretek cigarette, the clove scent sharp in the night air. You are of ancient lineage, Raiden Mas, Poirot began, yet circumstance has placed you in a position of subordination. That must gall. Wibowo's proud features tightened. I make no secret of it. My family lost its lands in the cultivation system, but I chose to learn from Suetomo, to preserve the true art against the commercial flood. He promised me eventually the forbidden motifs. With him gone, he spread his hands expressively. With him gone, perhaps you inherit those secrets by default. Wibowo's eyes flashed. I would not kill for them. There are other ways. Such as? The young man was silent. Later, Nyai Larasati came at Poirot's quiet summons, appearing like a shadow in her dark cayenne. They spoke in the garden, away from European ears. You loved him deeply, Poirot said simply. She bowed her head. He was my world. For 10 years I served him faithfully, body and soul. Lately he spoke of a marriage alliance with the daughter of a rich Peranakan merchant. It would have given him capital to open his own workshop, free of the Tuan Bazaar. Her voice trembled with suppressed anger. He would have put me aside with a little house and a pension, but I could not hate him. Never. Yet others might hate on your behalf, or fear your reaction. She looked up sharply. No one would dare. Poirot returned at last to his room, where a houseboy had left a lamp burning low. On his writing desk lay a folded scrap of paper that had not been there earlier. He opened it cautiously. Written in crude block letters were the words, "Leave this place, Belgian. Some secrets are better buried." Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. Ah, the criminal grows nervous. Bon, that is when mistakes are made. He sat for a long hour, arranging his facts like pieces on a chessboard. The poison, antimony, readily available. The tea, prepared by Larasati, drunk in apparent solitude. The motives, greed, jealousy, ambition, fear of exposure. The false trails, the arsenic traces, the whispers of curses and ghosts. And now this warning. Outside, thunder rumbled over the distant volcanoes, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, drumming on the palm thatch like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the darkness, Poirot knew, the murderer was also awake, watching, waiting, perhaps preparing a second stroke. The little grey cells stirred restlessly. The pattern was there, half revealed, like a batik cloth after its first dyeing. But many more immersions would be needed before the full design emerged. Chapter 4. The Red Herrings Unravel. The rain that had threatened all evening now fell in earnest, a tropical downpour that turned the paths to rivers of red mud and drummed relentlessly on the tiled roofs. Hercule Poirot sat in his guest room, the windows shuttered against the storm, a single oil lamp casting steady light over the small table where he had arranged his notes in perfect symmetry. The anonymous warning note lay in the centre. Leave this place, Belgian. Some secrets are better buried. He studied it again through his pocket lens, noting the uneven pressure of the pen, the slight tremor in certain strokes. Signs of haste, perhaps of agitation. Bon, he murmured. The murderer reveals himself, or herself, by this impetuosity. A cool poisoner does not warn only one who begins to feel the net tightening. He rose and paced the room with his precise cat-like tread, hands clasped behind his back. The facts paraded before his mind in orderly procession. The poison, antimony, almost certainly from the rat poison in the storeroom. The delivery in the evening tea prepared by Nyai Larasati, but drunk by Suetomo in his private corner. The motives, 4 clear strands, financial dispute, romantic jealousy, thwarted ambition, fear of scandal. The red herrings, the traces of arsenic that pointed toward accidental contamination by dyes, The whispers of supernatural curses, the torn accusing letter, and now this clumsy threat. Yet something disturbed the symmetry. The fresh wax trail on the floor, the scuff mark of a European shoe, the completed parang batik finished after death. These did not fit neatly into any one motive. At dawn the rain had ceased, leaving the air washed clean and the garden steaming gently under the rising sun. Poirot descended early once more to the workshops, determined to set a small trap. He carried with him a leather-bound notebook he had purchased in Batavia, its pages filled with fictitious dye formulae in his own neat hand. Formulas he had invented overnight, complete with impressive but meaningless chemical symbols. On the cover he inscribed in bold letters, "Private patterns and secret recipes of Pak Suetomo, discovered among his papers." He left this enticing bait openly on the late master's table, waited with a canting tool so that any disturbance would be evident, then withdrew to observe from the shade of a nearby go-down. Workers arrived gradually, bowing respectfully as they passed. Nyai Larasati came first, pausing at the table to straighten a cloth that covered Suetomo's personal effects. She noticed the notebook, lifted it curiously, then replaced it exactly as before and moved on to her station. Roden Maswiboho followed, his glance lingering longer on the book. He even opened it briefly, frowned at the unfamiliar script, then closed it with a slight shake of the head. Neither had disturbed the canting wait. Hours passed. The sun climbed, the vats bubbled. Poirot, patient as a fisherman, waited. It was mid-morning when Mynheer Vandermeer appeared, ostensibly to inspect progress on orders. His florid face glistened with sweat as he toured the frames, exchanging brief words with the overseer. He approached Suetomo's corner last. Poirot watched intently. Vandermeer picked up the notebook, thumbed through several pages rapidly. Then, glancing about to ensure he was unobserved, slipped it inside his linen jacket before hurrying away towards the house. Poirot permitted himself a small smile of satisfaction. Ah, the fish bites! Greed, perhaps, or fear that incriminating formulae are revealed. He followed at a discreet distance and intercepted the planter in his office, a cool room lined with ledgers and sample books of batik. "Monsieur Vandermeer," Poirot said pleasantly, closing the door behind him. "You have taken something that interests you greatly." Vandermeer started violently, then attempted a bluff laugh. "Merely checking if the police had overlooked anything useful. Business must continue, you understand." Poirot extended his hand. Reluctantly, the planter returned the notebook. "You will forgive me," Poirot continued, "but I must ask, lately there were disagreements between you and Pak Suetomo over money matters." Vandermeer mopped his brow with a large handkerchief. "Business discussions, nothing more. Suetomo's work was valuable, too valuable. He demanded a larger share of profits, threatened to leave and take his skills elsewhere. I could not allow that. Threatened to leave, or threatened to expose something." The planter's eyes flickered. "Expose? What nonsense! Perhaps the use of inferior synthetic dyes imported cheaply from Germany, mixed with traditional materials to increase output while maintaining the appearance of quality. Such adulteration might ruin the reputation of your boutiques in Europe." Vandermeer paled. "Who told you that?" "No one, but Hercule Poirot observes. The new consignments of aniline dyes arrived last month. Arsenic compounds are common impurities in such products. Convenient, none, to have traces of arsenic appear in the victim, suggesting accidental poisoning from contaminated materials." Vandermeer sank into his chair. "It was only to meet demand. Suetomo discovered it. He was furious. said it dishonored the art. He demanded half the profits, or he would inform the buyers. Blackmail, in effect. Strong words, monsieur. We were negotiating. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And now, with him gone, the problem vanishes. The workshop continues under your control. Vandermeer rallied. I did not kill him. I was in the house all evening. Ask the servants. Servants can be mistaken or influenced, Poirot said mildly, but we shall verify. He left the office deep in thought. Greed was a powerful motive, and Vandermeer had opportunity. The storeroom key hung in his office. Yet something still lacked harmony. In the early afternoon, Poirot sought out Mevrouw Vandermeer in the shaded pavilion overlooking the rice fields. She was embroidering a length of silk, her needle flashing in the light. Madam, he began, the rumour of an attachment between you and the late Puxetimo. How much truth was there? She laid down her work, her expression calm. Very little. I found him charming, cultured in his way. We spoke often of art. My husband is preoccupied with commerce. But an affair? No. Gossip exaggerated admiration into scandal. And yet you feared that gossip? Only because Hendrik is jealous by nature. He would have believed it. There were scenes. Poirot bowed. Thank you for your candour. He found Whodunit, Whodunit next, supervising the dyeing vats. The young man wiped indigo from his hands as Poirot approached. The forbidden patterns, Poirot said without preamble. Now that Suetomo is gone, will you execute them? Whodunit's face darkened. I would not presume. Tradition is not so easily set aside, but perhaps in time. Or perhaps Suetomo's death removes the last obstacle to your ambition. I desired knowledge, not death. Nyai Larasati, questioned again in the garden, admitted fresh bitterness. He promised me security forever. Then he spoke of this new marriage. I burned with anger, but I did not poison the tea I brewed with my own hands. As evening approached once more, Poirot examined the storeroom anew. On the floor near the rat-poison shelf, he discovered something he had missed before. A single brass button, engraved with a small anchor. The insignia of a Surabaya yacht club. Such buttons adorned the lightweight jackets favoured by Dutch gentlemen. He weighed it in his palm thoughtfully. Meneer Vandermeer was a member of that club, yet doubt lingered. The completed parang batik, finished with flawless skill, could not have been the work of the clumsy planter. And then, as the dinner gong sounded distantly, a worker came running from the women's section, crying out in Malay. Another had fallen ill, violent stomach pains after drinking tea in the rest hut. Poirot hurried to the scene. The woman, a young dyer named Siti, lay writhing on a mat, clutching her abdomen, while others fanned her anxiously. Dr. Janssen arrived swiftly, examined her, and administered an emetic. Within an hour she was weak but recovering. A mild dose, he told Poirot privately. Not enough to kill, perhaps a warning or an attempt gone wrong. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or both. The poisoner strikes again, but clumsily. The net tightens, and panic spreads. He looked toward the main house, where lights were beginning to glow against the twilight. Somewhere within that orderly colonial world, or in the shadowed workshops beyond, a murderer was growing desperate. And Hercule Poirot, with the patience of a master craftsman applying wax-resist stroke by stroke, was preparing the final immersion that would reveal the hidden pattern beneath him. Chapter 5. The pattern emerges. The incident with the young dyer City cast a deeper shadow over the plantation. Though she recovered swiftly under Dr. Janssen's care, The news spread like wildfire through the kampongs. The poisoner was still among them, and no one was safe. Workers glanced fearfully at their tea gourds. Overseers doubled the watch at night. Even the gamelan practice in the village fell silent, as though the bronze keys themselves feared to speak. Hercule Poirot, however, was energized rather than dismayed. He moved through the workshops and house with renewed purpose, his little grey cells working at their maximum velocity. The second poisoning, mild and unsuccessful, was the mistake he had awaited, the over-hasty stroke of a criminal who felt pursuit closing in. He began by reassembling every fragment of evidence in the privacy of his room, laying them out upon the teak desk like pieces of a half-finished batik. The torn accusing letter, reconstructed now with gum arabic to reveal Vandermeer's complaints about rising costs. The brass yacht club button, the wax trail, the forged warning note, the traces of arsenic in the new synthetic dyes, and, most crucially, the packet of rat poison whose contents had diminished by precisely the amount needed for a fatal dose. One fact now stood clear. The arsenic was deliberate misdirection. The old natural dyes contained no dangerous quantities. Only the cheap German aniline imports did. And those imports had been ordered personally by Mynheer Vandermeer to cut expenses and increase production. Poirot summoned Dr. Janssen for a final consultation. "Tell me, doctor," he asked, "if one wished to simulate dye-related poisoning while using antimony, would the addition of a small arsenic trace serve?" "Perfectly," the doctor replied. "It would confuse initial examination and point suspicion toward industrial accident. Clever, in a crude way." "Crude, yes," Poirot agreed, "but effective for a time." He next examined the completed parang rusak batik that had troubled him. Under strong sunlight, he detected a microscopic flaw in the wax resist, a tiny crack where dye had bled, invisible to most eyes but betraying a moment of haste or inexperience. No master like Suetomo would have allowed such imperfection. Someone had finished the piece after his death, perhaps to suggest he had completed it himself and died later of accidental causes. And that someone had worn European shoes. By late afternoon, Poirot had reconstructed the fatal evening with precision. Suetomo, proud of his new pattern, had invited his patron, Vandermeer, for a private viewing after the workers departed. It was their custom. The Dutchman would admire, offer suggestions, and they would share a cup of tea brewed by Larasati but poured by the master himself. Trust was absolute. On that evening Vandermeer had come prepared. While Suetomo turned to unroll a fresh cloth, the planter had tipped antimony powder into the cup, adding a pinch of arsenical dye for confusion. They drank. Suetomo collapsed almost immediately. In panic, Vandermeer had attempted to complete the batik himself, to make it appear the dyer had worked longer, spilling wax in his haste, losing a button in the struggle to roll the cloth. Then he fled, leaving the body to be discovered by night watchmen. Every motive now aligned with one man. The financial dispute had escalated. Suetomo had proof of the adulterated dyes and threatened exposure unless granted half ownership. Vandermeer could not afford scandal. European buyers were already questioning authenticity. Murder became the cheaper, solution. The romantic rumours about Mevrouw Vandermeer were baseless. Servant gossip exaggerated from innocent conversations. Raden Maswibovo's ambition was real but patient. He had no need of murder. Nyai Larasati's jealousy had been wounded pride, not lethal hatred. All were red herrings, skillfully scattered like random wax droplets to obscure the true design. The second poisoning confirmed it. Only Vandermeer had access to both remaining antimony and the workers' rest hut, where he sometimes distributed bonuses. The mild dose was meant to spread general panic and deflect suspicion onto superstitious natives. At dusk, Poirot requested that everyone assemble in the main salon. The Vandermeers, Rodin Maswibowo, Nyai Larasati, Dr. Jansen, and the Dutch police inspector who had arrived that morning. Rain had returned, lashing the windows and turning the veranda into a silver curtain. Poirot stood before them, small and immaculate, his hands neatly clasped. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began quietly, "the pattern is now complete. The batik of murder has undergone its final dyeing, and the design stands revealed." He recounted the facts with meticulous clarity. The financial pressure, the adulterated dyes, the private viewing, the poisoned cup, the clumsy attempt at completion, the button, the warning note written in European hand. All eyes turned to Mynheer Vandermeer. His florid face had gone ashen. Sweat beaded despite the cool rain. "It is not true," he stammered. "Lies, all of it." But when Poirot produced the reconstructed letter and the brass button, and when the inspector confirmed the diminished rat poison, the planter's defiance crumbled. Suddenly he bolted, shoving past the surprised doctor and plunging through the French doors into the storm-lashed garden. "Stop him!" cried the inspector. Poirot remained calm. "He will not go far." And indeed, within moments, shouts arose from the direction of the rice paddies. Lanterns bobbed. Figures struggled in the mud. Vandermeer, blinded by rain and panic, had stumbled into a deep irrigation ditch. Servants and police hauled him out, drenched and defeated. As he was led away, handcuffed now, he turned a last despairing glance toward his wife. Mevrouw Vandermeer stood pale but composed, tears in her eyes, not of grief, Poirot noted, but of relief. Rodin Maswibowo bowed deeply to the detective. "Justice is done. The art will continue pure." Nyai Larasati, silent until now, whispered, "The burning is over." Outside, the rain began to ease, and a shaft of moonlight pierced the clouds, silvering the wet leaves of the indigo plants. Poirot permitted himself a small sigh of satisfaction. Another triumph for order over chaos, for the little grey cells over the passions that drive men to murder. Yet, even as the household dispersed, he felt the familiar melancholy that follows resolution. Tomorrow he would continue his journey through the Spice Islands, seeking the tranquility that always eluded him. For where there were human beings, there would always be another pattern waiting to be revealed. Chapter 6. Pursuit through the paddy fields. The storm had returned with renewed fury, as though the very heavens protested the unmasking of guilt. Rain lashed the veranda in sheets, turning the steps to treacherous slicks and the garden paths to rushing streams. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes. Mynheer Hendrik Vandermeer, his linen suit sodden and clinging, his face a mask of desperate terror, plunged down the steps and into the darkness beyond the lantern light. The Dutch inspector shouted commands in Malay and Dutch alike. Houseboys seized lanterns and gave chase, their bare feet sure on the muddy ground. Rodin Maswibowo followed swiftly, his white suit rapidly darkening with rain. Even Dr. Jansen, spectacles fogged and medical bag abandoned, joined the pursuit. Hercule Poirot remained beneath the shelter of the veranda roof, immaculate despite the chaos, his Panama hat untouched by a single drop. He watched with calm detachment, hands clasped behind his back. "He will not escape far," he observed quietly to Mevrouw Vandermeer, who stood beside him, one hand gripping the balustrade. "Panic is the enemy of the criminal. It robs him of reason." Another flash of lightning revealed the fugitive's progress. Vandermeer had veered not toward the main gate and the motor car, but toward the rice paddies that stretched beyond the indigo fields. Broad, flat expanses, now treacherous with floodwater. The bunds between the Sawar were narrow and slippery. Irrigation ditches ran deep and swift. Shouts echoed through the rain. Lanterns bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps. Then came a cry of alarm, followed by a heavy splash. Poirot nodded, as I anticipated. Minutes later the pursuers returned, half carrying, half dragging the sodden planter between them. Vandermeer's struggles had ceased. He was mud from head to toe, his breath coming in great gasps, one ankle already swelling from a twist in the dark. The inspector snapped handcuffs upon his wrists with grim satisfaction. Back in the salon, lamps were relit and towels brought. Vandermeer slumped in a rattan chair, water pooling beneath him, his former bluster utterly spent. Poirot stood before him, small and precise, the very embodiment of order triumphant. "You have run far enough, monsieur. It is time to speak the truth." Vandermeer lifted his head, eyes defeated. For a long moment, only the rain spoke, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. Then the words came, halting at first, then in a rush. "Yes, I poisoned him. So Itomo had discovered the synthetic dyes, the cheap aniline colours I mixed in to stretch the profits. He was furious, said it betrayed centuries of tradition, that the European buyers would soon detect the difference, and our reputation would be ruined. He demanded half the business, or he would expose everything, right to Amsterdam himself." He passed a shaking hand across his face. "I could not let that happen. We had debts, the plantation mortgage, everything rested on the Batik sales. That evening, he invited me to see the new Parang Rusa cologne after the workers left. Larasati had prepared the tea as always. While he unrolled the cloth to show me the pattern, I tipped the antimony into his cup. I had taken it from the storeroom earlier, ground fine, and a little of the arsenical dye, to make it seem like contamination from the vats." His voice dropped to a whisper. He drank, and within moments the agony began. He looked at me, accusing, unbelieving. I panicked. I tried to finish the batik myself, to make it appear he had worked longer and collapsed later. But my hands shook, the wax spilled. I lost the button in the struggle with the heavy cloth. Then I fled. Mevrouw Vandermeer turned away, tears streaking her face, but she did not speak in her husband's defense. Vandermeer continued, broken now. "When you arrived, monsieur, I grew terrified. The warning note, childish, I know. And then today, when that girl City fell ill, I had put a little in the communal teapot, hoping to create confusion, make it seem a mad native was striking at random. But I used too little. I could not even poison properly a second time." Poirot regarded him with grave compassion. "You thought it would be quick, painless?" Vandermeer shuddered. "I thought only of saving what I had built. Instead, I destroyed everything." The inspector formally charged him. Servants were summoned to escort the prisoner to the lock-up in Surabaya until trial. As Vandermeer was led away, he paused before his wife. "Anna, forgive me." She met his gaze steadily, her voice quiet but firm. "There is nothing left to forgive, Hendrik, only to forget." The doors closed behind him. The storm began to ease, the rain softening to a gentle patter. In the sudden hush, Raden Maswibowo stepped forward and addressed Poirot with deep respect. "Tuan Poirot, the workshop, its future." Poirot raised a hand. "Will be decided by the courts and by those who truly love the art. But I think, Raden Mas, that the forbidden patterns will find worthy hands at last." Nyai Larasati, who had watched everything in silence from the shadows, now approached. She placed a small bundle, wrapped in batik cloth, into Poirot's hands. A length of the finest indigo tulle bearing a delicate phoenix motif. For your journey, Tuan. A remembrance that beauty can emerge even from bitterness. Poirot accepted it with a courteous bow. You are most kind, Nyai, and most wise. Outside, the clouds parted briefly, and moonlight silvered the dripping leaves. The air smelled clean, washed of its heavy secrets. The case was closed. Justice, slow but inexorable, had followed the chaotic flight through the paddy fields to its inevitable end, and Hercule Poirot, his little grey cells at peace once more, prepared to bid farewell to the island of spices and dyes, of beauty wrought with wax and fire, and of human passions no less intricate and dangerous. Chapter 7. The Wax Resists No More. The morning after the dramatic arrest dawned clear and serene, as though the island itself had exhaled a long-held breath. Sunlight filtered through the leaves of the warring trees, casting dappled patterns on the wet earth, and the air carried the fresh scent of rain-washed indigo. The plantation stirred slowly to life. Workers returned to their frames with cautious relief. The vats bubbled once more, and the rhythmic tap of chaps against cloth resumed like a heartbeat restored. Hercule Poirot took his breakfast on the veranda, black coffee, a ripe papaya, and thin slices of Dutch bread, while observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. The household moved about him like figures in a newly harmonious tableau. Mevrouw van der Meer, pale but composed in a simple white dress, conferred with the overseer about continuing operations until the courts decided the estate's fate. Raden Maswibowo, his proud bearing softened by gratitude, directed the careful packing of finished batiks for shipment. Nyai Larasati worked silently at her station, her hands steady again as she guided the canting in flowing lines of wax. After breakfast, Poirot requested a final gathering in the main workshop itself, beneath the open sides where breezes stirred the hanging cloths like colourful banners. Those most concerned assembled: Mevrouw van der Meer, Raden Maswibowo, Nyai Larasati, Dr. Janssen, and the Dutch inspector who had remained to tie up formalities. Poirot stood beside Paxuetomo's low table, now cleared of tragedy and bearing only the tools of creation. He spoke quietly, yet every word carried in the hush. Mesdames et messieurs, the case is closed, but it is fitting that we gather here, in the place where beauty was wrought and where darkness briefly intruded. Hercule Poirot will explain once more, for clarity is the enemy of confusion. He recounted the entire design with his customary precision. The financial pressure that led Van der Meer to adulterate dyes, Suetomo's discovery and ultimatum, the private evening viewing that provided opportunity. The antimony slipped into the tea, the pinch of arsenical dye to mislead, the panicked attempt to complete the batik and establish a false timeline. The lost button, the spilled wax, the clumsy warning note, the desperate second poisoning. Every strand, Poirot concluded, led back to one man whose greed overcame his humanity. The red herrings, the rumours of romance, the thwarted ambition, the wounded love, were but scattered droplets of wax, intended to obscure the true pattern. Yet wax resists dye only temporarily. Truth, like the final immersion, always prevails. Raden Maswibowo bowed deeply. You have restored honour to this place, Tuan. The master's secrets will now pass to those who reverence them. Nyai Larasati spoke softly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The burning is ended. The cloth can be clean again. Mevrouw van der Meer, her voice steady, added, My husband's actions were his alone. I knew nothing of the adulteration or the threat. But I will cooperate fully with the authorities. Perhaps something of value can yet be salvaged, for the workers, for the art, Dr. Jansen nodded approval. A tragic affair, but cleanly resolved. Your reputation precedes you justly, Monsieur Poirot. The inspector closed his notebook with a snap. The confession is recorded, the evidence secured. Justice will proceed. Poirot inclined his head graciously. It is the little grey cells that deserve the credit. They demand only order and method, and they receive it. He cast a final glance around the workshop. At the glowing cloths, the patient hands of the dyers, the steam rising like incense. Here, in this place of patient craft, a terrible disruption had been set right. The wax had resisted the poison, truth had resisted the lie. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered a moment alone. He touched lightly the edge of a half-finished batik, a graceful Garuda bird emerging from indigo depths, and permitted himself a small, reflective smile. Beauty, he murmured, requires resistance, and so does justice. Then, turning his steps toward the house to pack his valise, he left the workshop to its renewed rhythm, the quiet, eternal dance of wax and dye, pattern and revelation. Chapter 8. Denouement under the frangipani. The heat of the day had softened into a golden evening when Hercule Poirot requested one final gathering, this time not in the house or workshop, but beneath the ancient frangipani tree that shaded the lawn between them. Its heavy blossoms, cream and gold, released their intoxicating perfume into the warm air, and petals drifted occasionally onto the rattan chairs arranged in a loose circle. Lanterns had been hung in the branches, ready for nightfall. But for now, the light was still the sun's, gentle, slanting, forgiving. Those who had lived through the storm of the past days assembled quietly. Mevrouw Anna van der Meer, in a simple batik kain of deep indigo, her ash-blonde hair unbound for once. Whodunit Wibowo, in traditional Javanese dress, a sign of respect for the occasion. Nyai Larasati, graceful and composed, bearing a small tray of teacups. Dr. Jansen, spectacles polished, notebook closed, and the inspector, who had agreed to delay his departure for this last act. Poirot stood at the centre, small and dapper in a fresh white suit, his hands clasped before him, his moustaches magnificent in the evening light. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying easily in the still air, "it is not often that Hercule Poirot prolongs a case once the criminal is in custody. But here, beneath this beautiful tree in this place of creation and tragedy, it is fitting that we review together the full pattern, one last time, so that no thread remains tangled." He spoke with measured eloquence, recapitulating every clue, as though unrolling a flawless length of batik. The financial dispute that became blackmail, the adulterated dyes that threatened reputation, the private evening ritual of tea and admiration that provided perfect opportunity, the antimony from the storeroom, the pinch of arsenic to mislead, the spilled wax, the lost button, the forged note of warning, the second desperate poisoning that revealed panic, and finally the flight through the paddy fields that ended in surrender. He paused, letting the words settle like petals on still water. Many false trails were laid. The rumour of a lover's intrigue, mere gossip embroidered from innocent conversations. The noble ambition of Whodunit Wibowo, real but patient and honourable. The wounded heart of Nyai Larasati, deep but incapable of such betrayal. Even the whispers of curses and ghosts, superstitions stirred to cloud clear sight. Poirot's green eyes moved from face to face. All these were red herrings, scattered with cunning. Yet, like wax resist on cloth, they could not withstand the final immersion of truth. The little grey cells, mes amis, demand order, and murder is the supreme disorder. a soft breeze stirred the frangipani branches. A shower of blossoms drifted down, catching in Niai Larasati's dark hair, brushing Mevrouw van der Meer's shoulder. Mevrouw spoke first, her voice low but steady. "You have given us clarity, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever the future holds for this estate, we can now face it without shadows." Raiden Merswibovo inclined his head. "The patterns will continue, Tuan, pure as they were meant to be." Niai Larasati offered the tray. "Tea, Tuan, one last cup, brewed with clean hands and quiet heart." Poirot accepted with a grave smile, raising the delicate porcelain in a small salute. "To truth," he said simply. They drank together in silence, the gamelan beginning its evening song from the distant kampong. A gentle, healing melody that floated across the rice fields like incense. When the cups were empty, Poirot set his down with finality. "There is nothing more to say. The wax has done its work. The dye has taken. The pattern is complete." He bowed to each in turn, courtly, precise, sincere, and turned toward the house to oversee the packing of his valise. Behind him, under the frangipani, the little group lingered a while longer, watching the first stars appear above the volcanic peaks, listening to the ancient music of bronze and bamboo. The poison was purged, the cloth was clean, and beauty, resilient as ever, would rise again from the vats of indigo and fire. Chapter 9. Reflections on Indigo. The plantation settled into an uneasy calm in the days following Hendrik van der Meer's arrest. The workshops hummed once, more with purposeful activity. Yet an air of introspection lingered, as though the very cloth-absorbing dye carried memories of the turmoil it had witnessed. Hercule Poirot, his departure delayed by the need to give a formal statement to the authorities in Surabaya, found himself with rare hours of quiet contemplation. He spent them wandering the estate's paths at dawn, or in the languid heat of early afternoon, observing the patient labour that transformed humble plants into works of enduring beauty. The indigo fields stretched in orderly rows, their narrow leaves glistening with dew. Women harvested the bundles with curved knives, singing soft Javanese lullabies as they worked. In the soaking pits the cut stems fermented, releasing their deep blue secret. Then came the vats, great earthenware vessels, where the oxidizing dye turned from pale green to profound indigo with each immersion of the cloth. Poirot watched the process one morning from the shade of a palm-thatched shelter, seated on a low bamboo bench. A master dyer, appointed temporarily in Suetomo's place, demonstrated the stages. The cloth dipped, squeezed, hung to oxidize in the open air, then dipped again and again until the color reached the desired depth. 8, 10, 12 immersions for the richest shades. Many times, the dyer explained in careful Dutch, the cloth must go into the vat. Each time it resists a little less, takes the color a little more. Patience, Tuan, always patience. Poirot nodded, stroking his moustaches thoughtfully. And the wax? It resists entirely where it is applied. Yes, Tuan, the wax protects. What is covered stays white, or takes only the next dye. So the pattern grows, layer upon layer, secret upon secret, until the final boiling removes the wax and everything is revealed. The little Belgian smiled. A perfect metaphor, mon ami. Life itself is such a batik. We apply our resistances, pride, fear, greed, believing we protect what is precious. Yet truth is the final bath. It strips away the wax, no matter how carefully applied, and the hidden design stands clear for all to see. He thought of the characters in this Javanese drama. Vandermeer's greed had been a thick coating of wax, intended to preserve his prosperity, yet it had cracked under pressure and let the poison seep through, not only into Swetemo's cup, but into his own soul. Mevrouw Vandermeer's cool reserve had resisted deeper scrutiny for a time, concealing not guilt but quiet disillusionment with a marriage grown hollow. Whodunit noble pride had masked ambition, yet it was an ambition tempered by honour. Nyai Larasati's devotion had resisted betrayal until the very end, preserving her dignity even in grief. And the plantation itself, caught between Dutch commerce and Javanese tradition, between synthetic shortcuts and ancient craft, had resisted change until violence forced revelation. Later that afternoon, Poirot sat beneath the warring tree with a cool glass of Escheruk, watching clouds gather over the distant volcanoes. He reflected on the clash of cultures that coloured every aspect of life in the Indies. The imposing colonial house overlooking humble kampongs, European ledgers recording profits from patterns rooted in Cretan mysticism, a Belgian detective applying orderly logic to mysteries steeped in tropical passion. Always the same, he murmured to himself. Wherever men and women gather, London, Cairo, Java, the motives are eternal. Love, hate, greed, fear. Only the dyes change. Nyai Larasati passed nearby, carrying a fresh bolt of cloth, and paused to offer a shy smile. In her eyes, Poirot saw acceptance, the beginning of healing. The art would survive. Beauty would emerge again from the vats. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of indigo and crimson, Poirot rose with decision. His statement was complete. The steamer schedules waited for no man. Tomorrow he would board the train to Batavia, and thence the ship homeward. He felt the familiar melancholy that attended every solved case. Not regret, but a quiet awareness of human frailty. Yet also satisfaction. Order restored, truth revealed, the cloth made clean. The indigo had done its work. The pattern of murder was fixed forever in its deepest blue, unresisting now to the light of justice. And Hercule Poirot, guardian of symmetry and clarity, prepared to seek the next imperfect design, awaiting his meticulous hand. Chapter 10. Farewell to Java. The morning of departure arrived with the gentle clarity that follows tropical rain. A light mist rose from the rice paddies, veiling the distant volcanoes in soft greys and lavenders, while the sun, already warm, touched the dew on the indigo leaves and turned them to living emeralds. Hercule Poirot stood on the veranda of the Vandermeer house, his valise packed and waiting beside him, his white linen suit impeccable, his Panama hat tilted at the precise angle that experience had taught him best, defied the equatorial glare. A small group had gathered to see him off. Mevrouw Anna Vandermeer, composed now in a simple batik kabaya of deep soga brown, Whodunit bearing a carefully wrapped parcel, Nyai Larasati, her eyes bright with quiet gratitude, even Dr. Janssen, who had come to pay final respects before returning to Surabaya. The motor car idled on the gravel drive, its Javanese driver standing patiently beside the open door. Yet Poirot lingered, for farewells, when sincerely offered, deserved their proper moment. Mevrouw Vandermeer spoke first. Monsieur Poirot, you came as a stranger and leave as the restorer of our peace. Whatever lies ahead, trials, changes, this place will endure, because truth has been spoken here. I thank you. Poirot bowed with courtly grace. Madame, it is Hercule Poirot who thanks you for your hospitality. Strained though the circumstances were, you have strength. The estate will need it in the months to come. Whodunit stepped forward, and presented the parcel. A length of the finest Tulis batik, its parang rusak motif executed with flawless precision, the deep indigo glowing against reserved white lines that spoke of ancient royalty. "For you, Tuan," he said simply, "a remembrance of Java and of justice." Poirot accepted it with genuine pleasure, unrolling one corner to admire the craftsmanship. "Magnificent. It shall adorn my apartment in London. And when visitors inquire, I shall tell them the story of the Batik Dyer's poison, and of the noble hands that preserved its honour." Nyai Larasati approached last. From the folds of her kain she drew a small canting, its delicate copper spout polished to a warm gleam. "A humble tool, Tuan," she said softly, "but one that has drawn many patterns. May it remind you that even the smallest instrument, guided by care, can create great beauty." Poirot took it gently, turning it in his gloved hands. "I shall treasure it, Nyai, and I shall remember that resistance, whether of wax or of the human spirit, serves its purpose until the final revelation." A distant whistle sounded from the direction of the railway. The morning train to Surabaya that would connect with the great KPM liner bound for Singapore, Suez, and eventually Europe. It was time. Poirot descended the steps, pausing once more to survey the scene. The grand house with its red-tiled roof, the workshops where steam already rose from the vats, the endless green of the paddies stretching toward volcanic peaks, veiled in cloud. The air carried the mingled scents of frangipani, wet earth, and distant cloves, a perfume unique to this island of fire and spice. He raised his hat in a final salute. "Adieu, my friends. Java has been instructive and beautiful." The motorcar door closed with a soft thud. The driver engaged the gears, and the vehicle crunched slowly down the gravel drive, past the indigo fields where workers looked up and waved shyly, past the Kampong gate where children ran alongside for a moment, laughing. Poirot settled back against the leather seat, the batik parcel and canting upon his lap. As the plantation receded, he permitted himself a small, contented sigh. "Another triumph for the little grey cells," he murmured. "The Batik Dyer's poison solved, order restored, symmetry achieved." The road curved toward the railway station, and the estate vanished behind a screen of palms. Ahead lay the wide world once more. New ports, new faces, new mysteries waiting to be unpicked like intricate patterns beneath layers of wax and dye. Hercule Poirot adjusted his moustaches, replaced his hat at its perfect angle, and gazed forward with serene anticipation.